The Synoptic Gospels in review. What does the word synoptic mean? It is pertaining to or taking a general view of the principal parts of a subject, taking a common view, like in the first three Gospels, of their similarity in content, order, and statement. Thus we get the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. What was the main reason then for those three Gospels being included while John was excluded? It is said that John was not like the others. Matthew, Mark, and Luke contained the stories of Jesus and presented the stories in the same sequence and often with identical wording. John did not follow that pattern, however, and we can see that in the first 18 verses of his book, where it begins with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God." Rather poetic, isn't it? With the approach of a spiritualist aspect. Theologians have long debated which Gospels came first, as they felt it would establish the others. To try to decipher their findings, let's look at the authors individually, the time of their writing, and their purpose and the point for their writing. Let's start with Mark. Mark was mostly around 55 to 60 AD, and he covers the life of Jesus as an adult with the 12 disciples, John the Baptist, Herod, Pilate, Gethsemane, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. He gives Jesus three titles, which carry with it the messianic message from Isaiah. He is the Son of God, the suffering servant, and the Holy One of God. Yet he focuses his words and main point on the suffering servants to the Gentiles. Next is Matthew. Most likely after Mark, around 60 to 70 AD, primarily directs his book to the Jews and refers to Jesus as Messiah from birth to death and resurrection, but also includes a few scuffles with the Pharisees and Sadducees. Jesus is referred to as King, Bridegroom, Messiah, and Son of David. His purpose is to convince the Jews this is the Messiah that was promised, and he is the King of Israel. Then there was Luke. Around 59 to 65 AD, he writes much of the same, but most of his writing is said to come from Paul. Yet he tells the story of the death, burial, and resurrection, much like the others, but adds the story of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, who Jesus raises from the dead after 4 days. Luke's approach is more systematic, in an attempt to attest to the person and ministry of Jesus so the reader will be able to make more sense of it, proving the existence and purpose of Jesus, which was salvation for the world. He was the Savior, mainly written for the Gentiles. The oral tradition is the telling of a story over and over. We can see how each author could glean what he thought was the most important aspect of the gospel of Jesus. How might that have affected the story? Well, the stories may have been lost, changed by omission, or even changed by addition. Therefore, each author would write details from memory, and those details that were most prominent to them. Thus the slight variances in their narratives. But notice one thing is identical: the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Why is that important? Paul said, without the resurrection, faith would be futile. What did he mean by that? Simply that, had there not been a resurrection, there would be no cause for faith in Jesus. For resurrection from the dead was unheard of in those days. It proved he was the Son of God. The controversies over the Synoptic Gospels, although many, we will look at two. The first being the timelines may not be exactly the same from book to book. And the other, the two document hypotheses, oral traditions and mutual use. In other words, they wrote not only with the influences of the people they interviewed, but each other's books. Although it is the book of Mark which is considered the first, we cannot know that for sure. We can say that since all three books agree nearly verbatim of the life, times, and parables of Jesus, that the oral tradition had been kept well through repetition. Let us, like them, repeat the gospel until that day we hear, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant."